The sea was restless that evening, pushing salt-heavy wind into the open windows of the small apartment. Noor Rahim sat cross-legged on the floor, a thin drafting board balanced on her knees, the last rays of sunlight spilling over her sketches. From this high floor in their weathered sea-facing building in Karachi, she could see the shoreline curve into the horizon like a page turning toward some unknown chapter. Her pencil moved with quiet certainty. The lines she drew weren't just buildings, they were stories. Homes with wide verandas where children could play in the monsoon without fear of flooding. Walkways that wound around living mangrove roots. Roofs shaped to catch rain and feed community tanks. She didn't just want to build structures. She wanted to rewrite how the city breathed. From the kitchen came the faint clink of porcelain. Zara's voice floated in, humming a tune Noor didn't recognize. Something old and soft. Noor didn't look up when she said, "Ami, what if they don't pick me?" A pause. Then Zara appeared in the doorway, tea in hand, wearing the simple cotton shalwar kameez she favored at home. She had that look come on the surface, but with eyes that saw more than they admitted. "They will," Zara said, setting the tea down beside Noor's board. "And if they don't, it will be their loss." But she crouched, her dark hair falling forward as she studied the designs. "I think they will." The "they" was the Rahim Foundation, the most prestigious architecture scholarship in the country, the kind of award that opened not just doors, but entire skylines. Funded by Rahim Holdings, the name Noor had read in business headlines for years, usually followed by words like empire, billions, and visionary. Arman Rahim, the man who ran half the city's skyline, the man who, in family photos on the internet, looked as if he had been carved from sharp ambition and rare suits. Noor had never met him, never spoken to him, never even thought of him as anything but a distant figure in newspapers and investor reports. Her father was an absence, one that Zara never explained beyond. We were not meant to live in the same world. Nor she didn't know if not meant to meant, couldn't, or WOULDN. Single quotes D. The call that changed the Noor's phone, lying face down beside the tea, buzzed once. Then again she swiped it open without much hope. Subject: Rahim Foundation Future Cities Scholarship. Final decision. Her breath caught. She tapped it open. Dear Noor Rahim, we are pleased to inform you that your proposal, Mangroves and Marble, Coastal Housing for a Changing World, has been selected as the national winner of the Rahim Foundation Future Cities Scholarship. You are invited to present your work at the Rahim Holdings Annual Gala, held at the Glass Atrium, on the 14th of next month. This event will be attended by key national and international stakeholders in architecture, urban planning, and philanthropy. Our team will be in touch with logistics. Congratulations. Sincerely, Leela Mir, Head of Public Relations, Rahim Holdings. Read it twice, then 3 more times. Zara's face changed as she read over her shoulder. The joy that should have come first was slow to bloom, as if caught in the thorns of another thought. They picked you, Zara said, smiling finally, though it didn't reach the corners of her eyes. You did it. Noor laughed, a breathless, almost disbelieving sound. Ami, this is everything. The Glass Atrium, can you imagine? I've only seen it from outside. Zara nodded, but her gaze was far away. It's not the building. You need to imagine, it's the people inside it. The city watches over the next week. Noor's phone didn't stop buzzing. Local news picked up her win, praising her design as visionary yet rooted in heritage. Her school principal called for a small assembly in her honor. Social media ran with her renderings, sleek walkways cradled by mangroves, silver light catching on rooftop gardens. One afternoon, Kabir dropped by. Best friend, occasional photographer, constant thorn in her side, in the most loyal way possible. They're going to eat you alive at that gala, he said, flopping into their couch. In a good way, probably. You're coming with me, right? Noor asked, half joking. Absolutely. Someone has to make sure your hair isn't doing that static halo thing. Rude, Noor muttered, but she smiled. He scrolled through his phone. You know, Leela Mir liked one of your posts. The PR head. Yup, she's like high society royalty, and apparently engaged to the CEO himself, which means, he leaned forward, eyes mischievous. You'll be in the same room as the Arman Rahim. Noor shrugged, pretending her stomach didn't twist. He's just the guy whose name is on the scholarship. Sure, Kabir said, unconvinced. Just a guy who could probably buy this building for breakfast. Zara's decision later that night After Kabir left, Noor found Zara standing on the balcony, arms wrapped around herself. The wind tugged at her hair. "You're thinking too much, Ami." Zara didn't look at her. "Some doors open into gardens, Nora, some into storms." "This is a garden," Nora insisted. Zara's silence was heavy. Then, almost to herself, she said, "I need to be there." "At the gala?" Nora asked, surprised. Zara avoided big events, hated being photographed. Double quotes. "Yes, not for the crowd, for you." A name in the air. The days rolled forward. Invitations arrived on embossed cardstock. Numerous fittings for the gala dress took place in a cramped but talented boutique Zara trusted. The dress was sea glass blue, flowing like tidewater over rocks. One afternoon, as Noor adjusted a hem in front of the mirror, the tailor said, "You look just like a Rahim in that. Funny, isn't it?" Noor didn't ask what she meant. The night before the foundation's logistics meeting, Noor sat at her desk, cross-checking her presentation slides. She'd chosen every image with care, no glossy renderings of luxury, no faceless towers, only spaces where community and beauty could coexist. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then she read, "Your plans are beautiful. Mural like your mother's handwriting. See you at the gala." The words chilled her. She had never shown her designs to anyone outside the submission panel, Kabir and Zara, and yet someone knew her mother's handwriting. She stared at the message until the screen dimmed. The hum of the sea filling the silence. The city's skyline glittered like a stock ticker at night, alive, relentless, humming with transactions. From his office on the 82nd floor, Arman Rahim watched the glass and steel horizon through a wall of windows. Even at midnight, construction cranes swung over half-lit towers. In his world, steel didn't sleep. The Rahim Holdings glass atrium gala was 3 days away, and the building already throbbed with preparations. The gala wasn't just a showpiece, it was a chess move in a much larger game, an IPO launch that could take Rahim Holdings from regional titan to global player. Arman adjusted the cuff of his charcoal suit and turned back to the table where Salman Qureshi sat, the old man's voice rolling like oil over water. "You understand, Arman, this IPO isn't about sentiment. We can't afford distractions, especially not from a charity project that eats into our coastal numbers." Arman kept his expression neutral. "The scholarship winner's plan has merit. The optics of backing it are good for the board. Doesn't want optics." Salman cut in smoothly. "They want returns. The girls' mangrove designs threaten a $200 million luxury build, the one we've been nurturing for 3 years. Arman's jaw tightened, but he poured himself a drink instead of answering. He knew tells the careful emphasis on we, the way he leaned forward when applying pressure. The man in the mirror, after Salman left, Arman moved to his private study, where the noise of the building couldn't reach. A drawer slid open with a quiet weight. Inside, a stopped wristwatch lay on dark velvet. Its cracked face was frozen at 2:17 a.m. That was the hour 10 years ago when everything had collapsed. A marriage annulled under impossible circumstances, as the papers had politely called it. No one in his current world ever said her name aloud. But in Arman's mind it was still there, sharp as glass. Zara. He closed the drawer. A CEO couldn't indulge in ghosts. Leela's vision downstairs. In the event space, Leela Mir directed crews with the precision of an orchestra conductor. Strings of golden light cascaded from the ceiling in a waterfall effect, the stage framed by 2 massive LED screens. In her mind, this gala wasn't just about business, it was about presenting the perfect couple, the power duo who would carry Rahim Holdings into its next chapter. When Arman joined her for a quick walkthrough, she slid her hand through his arm, smiling for the photographer shadowing them. "It's going to be beautiful," she murmured, low enough that only he could hear. "It will," he said, matching her smile for the camera. They both knew beauty in their world was a controlled commodity. The portfolio back in his office, an assistant brought in a sleek tablet. "Scholarship winner's presentation, sir, for your review." Arman opened the file lazily. Another talented idealist, another set of renderings he'd skimmed before delivering the scripted compliments. But when the first slide loaded, he paused. The designs weren't the glossy, sterile visions he'd expected. They were alive. Organic curves that cradled rather than conquered the coastline. Pathways shaded by native mangroves. Rooftops that sloped like waves. The detailing, a memory surfaced. A sketchbook. its pages warm under his hand as he turned them beside her on a campus bench. Zara's pencil moving quickly, her lines forming a sparrow-wing flourish that curved upward before settling into structure. These drawings had that same edge, that same breath between precision and poetry. He flipped through the rest of the portfolio, every image striking closer to something in him he had locked away. Coincidence, he told himself. It had to be. The rehearsal, he forced his focus back to his keynote speech. The words were tailored to impress investors, clean, decisive, with just enough human warmth to seem accessible. As he read aloud in the empty boardroom, his voice echoed off the glass. And tonight, we honor not just structures, but the vision that makes them possible. The Rahim Foundation is proud too. He stopped. The lines felt hollow, tin against the weight of what he'd just seen in that portfolio. Arman sat in the silence for a long moment, staring at the skyline. Control was the currency of his life, and right now, something or someone was pulling at its seams. The memory that wouldn't leave. He saw her again in his mind, Zara standing barefoot on the balcony of their tiny rented flat. The night before the accident, she had been sketching an open-air market for the coastal village they'd visited the month before. "I want the roofline to feel like wings," she'd said, her eyes bright, like the building might take flight if the tide called it. He hadn't answered then. He'd been on the phone with Salman, closing a deal. The next night, the call had come, scaffolding down, a worker dead, the site swarming with inspectors. The board had demanded a clean break. "She ruined you, Arman. Sign the annulment, and this dies quietly." It hadn't died. It had gone silent. And silence, he'd learned, was its own kind of ghost. Salman's shadow that evening. Salman appeared, again, in the doorway, his silver cufflinks catching the last light. "We'll keep the scholarship girl in the program for now, but keep her in check. No talk of altering the coastal plans." Arman's response was measured. "If her work's good enough to win, it's good enough to present." Salman's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The board likes control, so do you. Don't let sentiment make you forget which side you're on." When the door closed, Arman's hands tightened around the edge of the desk. Control, always control. The alerta intercom buzzed. His head of security, voice clipped. "Sir, we have a situation." Arman pressed the button. "Go ahead." A woman just arrived at the reception level. "No appointment. She requested access to you. Says she's family." "I have no family appointments today," Arman said, already reaching for his tablet. "There's more," the voice said. "We ran her through facial recognition for safety." It flagged. "Well, you should see for yourself." A still photo appeared on his screen. Time dropped out of the room. It was Zara. The city's elite corridor smelled the same. After 10 years, polished marble, cold-conditioned air, and money moving without a sound, Zara Rahim walked through the revolving glass doors of the Rahim Holdings Tower, with her chin lifted and her pace measured, as if she belonged here. Once, she had. She wore a charcoal sari, its silk falling like shadow over her shoulder. The folds, precise. The fabric wasn't new, but the way she carried it, spine straight, gaze forward, made it feel like armor. She told herself she wasn't here to reclaim anything. Not love, not apology. She was here for Noor, to make sure when the truth surfaced, it did so on their terms. Not as a weapon wielded by the men who had driven her out. The first time she saw him in her mind, the present blurred with the younger self's memory. She had been 19, a scholarship student at the National College of Architecture. He was the guest lecturer, Arman Rahim, then just 30. With sharp eyes and a restless energy in the crowded lecture hall. She'd asked him a question about coastal housing design, one no one else dared to ask. Instead of dismissing her, he'd invited her to see his firm's model the next day. That was the beginning. They'd met again and again, coffee over blueprints, evening walks that ended in arguments about zoning laws. He had been a director then, ambitious, already working under the looming shadow of Salman Qureshi, the bungalow, and the pomegranate tree. They married in secret the following year. No hotel ballroom, no 1,000 guests, just a dusty, derelict bungalow on the city's outskirts, its paint peeling, its garden untamed in the back. A lone pomegranate tree grew half wild, its branches heavy with red fruit. Arman had said, "It's perfect, abundance in the middle." Of ruin, they planted their vows under its shade. She wore ivory cotton. He slipped a silver watch onto her wrist, promising, "This will never stop." For a time, They lived in that bungalow while he rose higher in the company. She worked on her own designs, markets that breathed, homes that held memory. The collapse it ended with a single call in the middle of the night. A scaffolding collapse on one of Rahim Holdings' sites. A worker dead. Zara remembered racing with him to the scene, rain making the concrete slick, sirens staining the night red. She remembered the family, a young widow, a child clinging to her leg. She remembered telling Arman, "We can't bury this." But Salman had other plans. The board called it an accident, but behind closed doors, they called it an opportunity, a problem to be erased before it reached investors. Then came the demand, the marriage, annulled. Zara erased from public record. "You were never married. You'll be taken care of generously if you keep quiet." She had refused the money. What she did take was the stopped wristwatch. It had cracked in the scuffle that night, and the child growing inside her. She had walked away before dawn. The return now. She stepped into the 24th floor reception, where her friend waited. Dr. Mira Siddiqui, attorney, and one of the few who had stood by her in the aftermath. Mira's embrace was quick but warm. "You look exactly the same," she said, "just sharper." "I need to make sure Noor's protected," Zara said, skipping the small talk. They took a corner table in the private lounge. Mira lowered her voice. "Zara, if the truth comes out at the gala, if the media runs with it, they'll frame you as a scandal. Gold digger, mistress, whatever sticks. They have an IPO on the line. The board will do anything to control the narrative." Zara's hands tightened around her cup. "Then I'll control it first." Mira's eyes were grave. "That's why I asked you to come. You need to see what Noor signed." The contract. Mira slid a printed copy across the table. It was the Rahim Foundation Scholarship Agreement. At first glance, it was standard project deliverables, deadlines, media obligations, but near the end, Zara saw it. Clause 1 for B, morality and representation. If any scholarship recipient is found to have misrepresented material facts regarding identity, personal history, or affiliations, the foundation reserves the right to revoke the award in full and seek recovery of all funds and expenses incurred. She read it twice, pulse climbing. They could use this to take everything from her, Mira said. Not just the scholarship. They could sue her for damages, and they'd have the public on their side. Zara's throat tightened. This wasn't just about Noor's dream anymore. This was about survival. She closed the folder with deliberate care. "Then we make sure they never get the chance." But, as she rose to leave, the page with clause 14B seemed to burn through her bag, a silent clock already counting down. The glass atrium was less a building and more an announcement. It rose out of the city's financial district like a shard of frozen light, its steel ribs glinting in the late morning sun. As the car slowed before its sweeping steps, Noor pressed her forehead to the window, her reflection blurring against the mirrored facade. She stepped out into air that smelled faintly of polished stone and jasmine from the manicured flower beds flanking the entrance. The hum of the city shifted here. No rickshaw chatter, no street vendors calling, just the low murmur of deals and the soft click of expensive heels on marble. Beside her, Kabir was already unzipping his camera bag. "Smile like you're inheriting this place," he teased, lifting his lens. "I'm not inheriting anything," Noor said, but she smiled anyway. Meeting Leela inside, the atrium opened into an expanse of glass and air. Light cascaded from the skylight 3 stories above, catching on the central water feature, where a thin sheet of water rippled down black granite. A woman approached, tall, poised, wearing a cream silk blouse that looked effortless and impossibly expensive. Her hair was swept back in a style that said, "I am in control, and I like it." "Noor Rahim," she said, offering a hand. "I'm Leela Mir, head of PR. Congratulations, the foundation is very proud to have you as this year's star." Her grip was firm but warm. Noor found herself momentarily disarmed by Leela's directness. "Thank you," she managed. "It's surreal." Leela smiled. "You'll get used to it. The gala will be intense. Cameras, questions, investors who pretend to know your work. My job is to make sure they actually know your work." Kabir, circling them for candid shots, quipped, "And my job is to make sure she doesn't trip over her own dress." Leela laughed, the kind of laugh that made you feel briefly chosen. "I like him," she told Noor, then gestured toward a set of glass elevators. "Let's start with the tour." The atrium tour. They rode the elevator. Upward, the city unfolding below like a map. On the 12th floor, they stepped into a conference level. Noor's senses drank it in, the faint scent of cedar from the custom paneling, the muffled hum of distant meetings, the gleam of chrome fixtures. Leela pointed out the foundation's offices, the media prep rooms, the rooftop garden designed for networking events. Noor took notes in her head, not about the networking, but about the design. How the glass corridors made you both visible and invisible. How the greenery softened the edges without hiding the steel. You'll present from here, Leela said, leading them to a balcony overlooking the main hall. Below, the gala stage was being constructed, scaffolds of light rigs, cables coiled like sleeping snakes, tech crews adjusting panels. Noor felt the weight of it all, a stage bigger than anything she'd ever stood on. The first meeting happened in a corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. Noor and Kabir were following Leela toward the elevators when a man stepped out of a side room. Glancing at a tablet, he looked up, and for a heartbeat, the air stilled. Arman Rahim. Noor had seen his face in news articles, but photographs flattened him. In person, he had the gravity of someone who carried entire skylines on his shoulders. Tall, composed, the fine lines at his eyes not from smiling but from looking too far. Too often Leela's voice softened. Arman, this is Noor Rahim, this year's foundation winner. His gaze met hers, steady but unreadable. Congratulations, he said. Your proposal, it's remarkable. Noor swallowed. Thank you. It's based on integrating mangrove buffers, floating plazas, and storm-resilient foundations to protect low-income coastal communities. Something flickered in his eyes, gone too quickly to name. He listened intently, as if each word mattered. I'd like to hear more, he said finally. Perhaps after the gala, we can discuss mentorship. It was said warmly, but there was a distance to it, as though he were both inviting and measuring her at once. Noor nodded, feeling oddly seen and unsettled. Salman, in the shadows after Arman left. Kabir muttered under his breath. Well, that was intense. Noor didn't answer. Her pulse was still not entirely steady. They turned a corner toward the media prep area, and there he was, Salman Qureshi. She recognized him from business profiles. Silver hair, immaculate suit, smiled like a polished blade. Noor Rahim, he said, drawing out her surname. Our shining star. I've read your proposal. Thank you, Noor said cautiously. He stepped closer, voice dropping into something patronizing. It's idealistic, beautiful on paper, but in the real world, these kinds of expensive charities tend to collapse under their own weight. It's not charity, Noor replied evenly. It's infrastructure. Storm damage costs the government millions a year. This pays for itself in 5. His smile thinned. Statistics. You'll learn investors prefer emotion. I have both, Noor said, matching his gaze. Something in his eyes hardened. He glanced toward APR assistant passing by. Have someone run a full background on Miss Rahim. Noor pretended she hadn't heard it, but her stomach tightened. The whisper back in the main hall. She lingered behind Kabir to take in the view from the balcony again. Below, 2 staff members were coiling cables near the stage. Salman's sending the journalist. One whispered, which one? Malik, the one who digs. Noor's ears pricked at the name. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down. An unknown number, Rayan. Malik, meet me, it's about your mother. Noor's breath caught. The stage lights below blurred in. Her vision, the garden terrace, was hidden between 2 towers of glass and steel, a suspended courtyard in the sky. From here, the city felt distant, muted beneath the faint hum of traffic far below. Potted olive trees lined the edges, and a single wrought-iron table sat in the center like an invitation or a challenge. Zara had chosen this spot deliberately. Not the boardroom, not a hotel lobby, not anywhere they could be overheard or staged for a photograph, just the 2 of them, face to face. Arman was already there when she stepped out, his back to her, gazing at the skyline. He didn't turn until she spoke. It's been a long time, she said. His eyes met hers, older now, sharper at the edges, but the same eyes that once read her sketches like they were love letters. 10 years, he said quietly, and you didn't make it easy to find you. The accusations. She set her bag on the chair opposite him. You didn't look hard enough. I did. His voice was firm but low, as if they were in a negotiation, not a reunion. I checked every contact, every place we ever talked about living. You vanished. I stayed invisible because I had to, she said, holding his gaze. For her, You know what Salman would have done if he'd found out. What the board would have said. He leaned back, exhaling. You think I wouldn't have protected you? I think you couldn't, she replied. Not then, maybe not now. The words hung between them, heavy as the skyline. Memories under glass. For a moment, neither spoke. The sunlight caught the glass walls, reflecting fragments of their faces back at them. She remembered another terrace, years ago, smaller, overlooking the sea from the bungalow's roof. They had stood there at dawn, sharing tea from one chipped mug, planning how they would design a school together. Once his career stabilized, that dream had dissolved in a single board meeting. Negotiating the truth. Zara broke the silence. I'm not here for a fight. I'm here because Noor deserves to know her story, on her terms. After the gala, we make a public statement. Together, no tabloids. Number sources close to the CEO. She hears it from us first. Arman's jaw worked. I can agree to that. But there's always a but, she cut in. But Salman controls the board, he said. If he thinks this threatens the IPO, he'll bury it. And Leela, his voice softened. Leela worked for years to build an image with me. She won't let it fracture days before the most important night of my career. Zara's hands curled into her lap. So, what you're saying is, if telling the truth costs you money, the truth, I'm saying the truth needs timing, he said, leaning forward. If we do this wrong, Noor gets caught in a storm neither of us can control. The ache of almost forgiven Esfer, the first time since she'd arrived, her voice cracked. We used to plan cities together. Arman, we used to talk about building things that lasted. And then one night, you let them tear us down instead. His eyes flickered pain, guilt, or something she didn't want to name. I didn't let them. I survived them, and maybe now we can fix what they broke. The ache in her chest was sharp enough to feel like betrayal all over again. The envelope. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed manila envelope, sliding it across the table. He didn't touch it at first. What's this? Proof, she said. So when Salman starts whispering about scandal and speculation, you have something they can't deny. He looked at her for a long moment, then finally picked it up. His fingers lingered on the flap. I'll open it now, he said. Zara rose from her chair. Do what you want with it. Just remember, she's not a liability. She's your daughter. She turned away before she could watch his expression change. Behind her, she heard the faint tear of paper as he broke the seal, and the scene cut to silence. The manila envelope lay open on Arman's desk. Its contents spread like evidence. In a case against himself, the DNA report was clinical, emotionless, paternity probability, 99.98%. Yet the black text seemed louder than any headline. Noor was his. He leaned back in his chair, the city a blurred sprawl beyond the glass wall. His pulse had steadied since opening it, but his thoughts hadn't. 10 years of distance, 10 years of not knowing, and now, knowing meant responsibility in a way nothing else ever had. Confrontation in the boardroom. Salman was already seated when Arman entered the small executive conference room. The old man's cufflinks gleamed, his expression unreadable. Arman tossed the report onto the table. She's my daughter. The company protects her. Salman glanced at the page, then back at him with a cool detachment that made Arman's skin crawl. Biology doesn't change the fact that your history is a liability. If the annulled marriage resurfaces, the IPO loses at least a quarter of its projected valuation. You know who will move in on that weakness? Hashem Dar. He's been circling for years. Arman gritted his teeth. You think I care about Dar right now? You should, Salman said smoothly. Because when he takes the waterfront project, you'll have nothing left to offer this board. Salman's solution. Salman folded his hands, his voice almost gentle. Here's the solution. Acknowledge her privately. Keep her out of the public. I fund her coastal project quietly. No fanfare, no headlines. And Zara signs a release binding her to permanent silence. No memoirs, no interviews, no whispers. In exchange, Noor gets her funding, her work gets built, and the IPO stays intact. Arman stared at him. You're asking me to erase them again? I'm asking you to choose survival, Salman replied. The board doesn't care about your personal redemption arc. They care about the empire you've built for them. The meeting with Leela. When Arman returned to his office, Leela was waiting. She stood by the window, her reflection framed against the skyline. I heard about Zara, she said softly. His guard went up. From who? A whisper from an old contact. I knew there were rumors, years ago, about a student wife. I hoped they were just that. She turned to face him. I love you, Arman, but I won't anchor a sinking ship. This isn't about the IPO, he said, though even to himself the words sounded thin. It's always about the IPO right now, she said, stepping closer. Let her shine from the shadows until it's over. After we close, we can welcome her, do the photo ops, tell the story, but not before. Her compromise was calculated, pragmatic, and in its own way, merciless. The man torn in two when she left. Arman stood alone in the center of the room. The stopped wristwatch lay in the drawer a few feet away. Still frozen at 2:17 a.m., Zara had carried that broken timepiece for a decade. His mind replayed Noor's voice when she'd explained her design, the conviction, the data, the quiet steel. Zara's voice in her, clear as if it had never left his life. If he followed Salman's path, Noor's work would live, but her truth would be buried. If he followed his own, the work and the truth might both die under the weight of scandal. For a man who had built skyscrapers out of nothing, this was the first foundation he didn't know how to lay. The messages he reached for his phone. It buzzed in his hand. An unknown number. He opened it. A photo filled the screen. Noor standing where the old bungalow had once been, her hands in her pockets, looking at the bare earth. The pomegranate tree was gone. The garden was nothing but a patch of upturned soil and rubble. Beneath it, a caption, "Your foundations were never clean." The seaside cafe was the kind of place Noor liked when she needed to think, quiet enough to hear the waves, busy enough to disappear into the crowd. Ceiling fans turned lazily above weathered wooden tables, and the air smelled of cardamom tea and salt water. She spotted Rayan Malik immediately. He wasn't dressed like a tabloid scavenger, number leather jacket or sunglasses indoors. Just a pale blue shirt rolled to the elbows, a satchel at his side, and eyes that missed nothing. He stood when she approached. "Noor, thanks for meeting me. I didn't exactly agree," she said, sliding into the chair opposite him. "You came," he replied simply, as if that was enough. The first reveal he didn't bother with small talk. From his satchel, he drew out a thin folder and laid it between them. The first photo was grainy but clear enough. Arman, Rahim, and Zara, younger, standing under the shadow of a pomegranate tree. Zara's hand rested on his chest. The way they looked at each other needed no caption. Noor's breath hitched. "Where did you get this?" "Archives. Not the kind you find in a library," Rayan said. "They were married in secret. That's your mother. That's your father." The marriage was annulled under pressure after a scaffolding collapse killed a worker on a Rahim Holdings site. He slid another photo forward. Twisted metal under floodlights. Rescue crews swarming. The company called it an accident. My sources say it was negligence. Safety reports buried witnesses paid off. The warning Noor stared at the photos, feeling the room tilt. "You think this is why you called me here?" "I think your win puts you in their spotlight," Rayan said, "and not in a good way. The board, the investors, they'll smile for the cameras, then find a way to erase you if you threaten their plans. You're the perfect story, until you're inconvenient." "They won't erase me," Noor said, her voice low but steady. "Not if my work speaks for itself." "They'll erase both if they have to," Rayan countered. "Your work, your name gone from the record. That's how they've survived this long." Defending Zarashi pushed the photos back toward him. "My mother made her choices. She left because she thought it was right. You don't get to turn that into a weapon." Rayan's gaze softened. "I'm not here to weaponize her. I'm here to tell you the truth so you're not blindsided when they use it against you." Noor wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but deep down, she knew the terrain he was describing. She'd felt it in Salman's smile, in the way Leela's questions were framed like assessments. The Rayan leaned in, lowering his voice. "I'm offering you something they'll never give you. Your voice, on record, in your words, not a leaked photo, not a close source quote, just you telling your story." Noor hesitated. The idea felt dangerous, and yet there was a flicker of temptation. "I want my work to be the headline," she said. "Not my lineage." "You can have both," he said, "but only if you control when and how it comes out. Otherwise, they'll decide for you." The watchy reached into his satchel again and placed something on the table, small, silver, and worn smooth at the edges. A wristwatch. The glass was cracked, the second hand frozen just above the 12. Noor reached for it slowly. "Where did you get this?" "Pawn shop years ago," Rayan said. It came with a story I didn't believe at first, that it belonged to a woman who walked away from the CEO of Rahim Holdings in the middle of the night. I've been tracing both of you ever since. The metal was cool in her hand, but as she turned it over, she felt it a faint, almost imperceptible tick, as if the watch, like her life, had been still for years and was now testing the air for movement again. The decision. She closed her fingers around it. After the gala, she said finally, if they try to erase me, we go public together. Rayan nodded. Do you? Neither of them noticed the man at the next table, sipping his coffee a little too slowly, his phone face down but recording. The tiny red light of the microphone blinked once, then stayed steady. The glass atrium did not open its doors so much. As Bloom, the night rose over the city like a velvet curtain, and inside, the gala unfurled in choreographed light. Cascades of gold dropped from the ceiling in 1,000 filaments, catching the eye and refusing to let it go. A string quartet sent bows gliding over strings until the air itself seemed lacquered. Beyond the glass, Karachi's skyline blazed ships like slow-moving planets in the harbor. Distant cranes paused like elegant storks. Zara stood just offstage, in the shadow of a drape, one hand on Noor's shoulder, feeling the heat of her daughter's breath through silk. Noor's dress was sea glass blue, the neckline clean, the skirt a whisper. Light skimmed over her cheekbones and caught in the black of her hair. She looked like the future, not the loud kind sold in billboards, but the quiet kind that keeps people alive. Breathe, Zara murmured, thumb drawing small circles on Noor's shoulder blade. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Slow. Noor nodded. Her eyes were not calm, but they were steady. In her other hand, she cupped a small model segment, tiny mangroves, rising from a mirrored base, their roots a tangle of silver, lines that looked delicate and were anything but. From the wings, Zara could see the front rows, ministers, investment bankers, a smattering of film stars. A poet washed alabaster in camera flashes. Leela Mir moved among them with the grace of a swan and the accuracy of a surgeon, placing sound bites where they would be quoted and smiles where they would be photographed. A handler's headset glowed at her jawline. When a tech ran up to murmur something, Layla didn't miss a beat. She nodded, redirected, and returned to her smile. Further back, Salman Qureshi performed his own liturgy. He clasped hands with donors whose eyes glittered like cufflinks, said iconic and legacy, and coastal luxury until the words became a single perfume. He was older than he let himself remember, but power preserved him like salt. And Arman. He stood a few steps from the central aisle, shoulders squared as if bracing for weather. To strangers he would look unflappable. To Zara, the tilt of his head gave him away, half listening to an investor, half tracking the stage where Noor would soon stand. In one pocket he held the night's speech. In another, the knowledge that the girl about to speak was his daughter. The quartet slid into a change of key. A producer raised 2 fingers. It's time, Zara whispered. Noor turned, and for a breath, the girl's poise cracked, and the child peered through. The child who used to fall asleep to the sound of waves, sketching roofs that could drink the rain. What if I can't make them see it? She asked softly. You don't make them, Zara said. You show them. Your work will do the rest. And if they don't listen, then you say it louder, Zara said. Smile thin and fierce, and I'll be here when you finish. Noor smiled back. The orchestra trembled into silence. The MC strode out, warmed the room with a practiced monologue about innovation and responsibility, and then his voice caught the chandelier. And now, our Rahim Foundation, future city's scholar, Noor Rahim. Applause rose like surf. Noor stepped into the light. Zara listened for the breath in the crowd, the shared intake when something is genuinely new. It came 3 sentences in, just after Noor displayed the first model, a floating plaza that rose and fell with the tide, anchored by a reef of mangroves whose roots filtered the water like a living sieve. Noor's hands were measure and grace, as she demonstrated how wind channels could be softened by staggered roofing, how storm-resilient foundations spread load like a cupped palm. Everyone thinks the water is the enemy, Noor said, her voice even. It is the messenger. We build to hear it. A hush moved outward, taking the donors first, then the ministers, then the poet, who closed her eyes as if memorizing a line she would steal later. Zara felt the shake in her own chest, not nerves now, but something like grief brushed into awe. Noor had always been better than either of them alone. The idea had carried Zara through 10 years of night. Seeing it breathed into a room of people who could fund the world made her feel both vindicated and small. On the edge of her vision, she caught Leila watching Noor with a complicated expression. Admiration's sparkle layered over calculus's shadow. Leila nodded once, almost involuntarily, when Noor fielded a complex question from a city engineer and answered with data, humor, and a sketch drawn live on the tablet. The style a whisper of someone else's hand. Zara felt that ghosted line. Like a thumbprint, Arman's face was unreadable to most, but not to her. Pride battled panic there. This was the man she had loved, the man power had adopted and tried to rename. He stood a little closer to the aisle now. When Noor quoted a study on monsoon damage and the 5-year repayment through reduced relief costs, his mouth twisted, a smile aborted by the fear of what came next. Noor's final slide faded into a rendered horizon. The coastline seeded with mangroves, rooftops shining like shells, a market that breathed. Applause broke, genuine, sustained, backstage. As the MC rapped and promised a brief intermission before the keynote, Noor stumbled into the wings where Zara caught her by both arms. "You did it," Zara said, and only then let the emotion leak into her voice. "You did it." Noor laughed, a sound that was half sob. "I forgot my name in the first minute," she said. "I thought I would choke." "You remembered everything that mattered," Zara replied. She tucked a strand of hair behind Noor's ear, the way she had when Noor was 5. "Drink. Sit. For 5 minutes, then we do press." Press. Noor blinked. Already, Leila slid into the pocket of space, like a dancer hitting her mark. Just a brief round, 2 sanctioned outlets, 2 social clips, then a photo for the foundation. "You were brilliant." The compliment was clean, honest. The strategy behind it was razor. Zara angled her body subtly between Leila and Noor. "We'll choose the outlets," she said, "and no personal questions." Leila didn't bristle. She measured. "Professional only," she agreed. "Took minutes each." Then, with a flash of sincerity that read as uncalculated, "Noor, your line about the water being a messenger. Perfect. Memorize it. They'll ask again." "Thank you," Noor said, bewildered but game. Leila turned to go. As she did, Salman materialized from a side corridor, oily as a shadow. "The room is hungry," he told Leila. "We'll feed them something iconic." Tight shots of the mangroves, coastal luxury in the bureau. Zara felt the tendons in her neck tighten. "It's a housing plan," she said, voice low. "Not a backdrop for champagne." Salman smiled, indulgent. "Everything is both." "Ms. Rahim," Zara said evenly. "Zara Rahim." For the first time all evening, Salman's mask flickered. Then he bowed half a centimeter. "Of course." He drifted away, already whispering to a camera team. Noor's fingers found Zara's. "Was that?" "Yes," Zara said. "Keep your answers clean, technical. Don't let them pull you into myth." They moved through to interviews like swimmers who knew the currents, Noor speaking in crisp, elegant sentences, Zara hovering just out of frame, nodding encouragement, slicing away any question that sniffed like gossip. When an anchor tried the casual, "And tell us about your family background, where do you find this drive?" Noor said, "From the coastline itself," and pivoted to the mechanics of route matrices. Leila, watching from a monitor, smiled, like a proud handler. In the intermission crush, Kabir materialized with a bottle of water and a grin so wide it might split his face. "You broke them," he said. "They'll never be the same." Noor gulped, breathless. "Did you get the crowd when they—" "Every gasp, every blink," Kabir said, tapping his camera screen. Then, softer, "You okay?" Noor's gaze slid past him to the auditorium. Arman had moved closer, just within the shadow of the aisle light. He looked as if he were counting his own heartbeats. "I want to talk to him," Noor said quietly. Zara felt the floor tilt again, not dizziness, but the old tectonic shift of life rerouting itself. After the keynote, she said, "Privately." "No cameras." Noor nodded. "Privately." They stood together for a beat in a little island of shadow. Elsewhere, the orchestra retuned, glasses chimed. A staffer with a tray edged backward, like a tide. Zara's mind catalogued everything that could still go wrong. The morality clause dog-geared in her memory. Rayan Malik's message. Salman's narrowed eyes. The way the atrium's glass surfaces reflected and multiplied everything until one truth became 12 angles. She steadied herself around a single fact. Noor had been magnificent. and magnificence is its own kind of armor. Remember, Zara said, no one frames you. You frame yourself. You tell them what your work means. You don't wait for them to name you. Noor looked at her as if she were trying to memorize the shape of that sentence. Okay, now, Zara added, because ceremony sometimes protects the fragile thing inside it. Stand up straight. Noor laughed, lifted her chin, and squared her shoulders. The girl was sunlight and steel. From the hall, the MC's voice swelled. Ladies and gentlemen, as we return to our seats, please welcome back to the stage. A tech runner darted past, face pale, screens acting weird. He muttered into his headset. I'm getting a stale feed in loop. Resetting. Layla glanced over sharply. Fix it, she said, composed but suddenly very still. Zara's skin prickled. The hair at the back of her neck rose. Old instincts. She stepped a little closer to Noor, positioning herself between her daughter and the stage, not sure from which direction the blow would come. The house lights softened. The jumbo LED screen behind the stage fluttered once, twice, a hiccup in a perfect body. Somewhere in the building, a surge coughed. The screen glitched into a grey grid, then blinked black, a beat of silence. Then the image flashed up, crisp and obscene in its confidence. A tabloid headline mock-up, bold letters gnawing the air. The CEO's secret wife returns. Illegitimate heir. It was on screen for less than a second. It was on screen long enough. A sound moved through the hall. Not quite a scream, not applause, but the gasp that follows a cut that draws blood. Glass caught it and flung it back. Ministers tilted forward. Donors' phones rose like a migration. The string quartet stuttered, then fell into a ragged hush. Zara's hand found Noor's wrist and squeezed. Leela snapped, kill the feed, into her mic, already turning toward the control booth. Salman didn't move at all. He simply watched the room bloom with chaos. His mouth curved like a man observing a chemical reaction he'd calculated perfectly. On the aisle, Arman took one step toward the stage before decorum remembered his ankles. Zara could hear her own pulse in her ears. The atrium, all glass and light, suddenly felt like a cage. The headline hung in the afterimage behind her eyelids, bright as a brand. And for the first time all evening, Nora's hand trembled inside hers. The headline blazed and vanished, but it did not leave. It stamped itself on the air, on the glass, on the whites of people's eyes. The atrium became a beehive struck with a hand, buzzing, ruptured, swarming for a center. Kill the feed. Leela snapped into her mic. A tech stumbled. The quartet's bows lifted like startled birds and stilled. Salman did not move. The corners of his mouth held a patient curve. A mathematician waiting for proof to arrive exactly on schedule. Noor stood just inside the wing, her hand in Zara's, her breath short as if the air itself had turned to stone. Arman felt everything he had arranged: teeter tablescapes, investor calls, timelines, the careful architecture of a life. He saw the crowd tilt toward the aisle, the phones rising like a small forest. He saw the doors, the exits, the security teams, hands to earpieces, waiting. Deny it, Salman said, materializing at Arman's shoulder like a second spine. We'll call it fake. Tabloid trash. I'll have legal send letters before the hors d'oeuvres hit the tables. Leela's eyes cut to Arman. Don't decide here, not in front of them, not like this. Arman looked past them both to the stage, to the mic, lit like a lighthouse, to the edge of the wing where Noor stood, blue dress catching the gold spill of chandelier light. The first time he had seen her in person, really seen her, she had described a roof that listened to wind. Now the wind was knives. Deny it, Salman repeated, flatter, or we all drown. Arman stepped away from him. He walked up the short stairs, each one ringing in his bones. The MC half turned, flustered, then retreated like a wave. Arman took the microphone, not looking at the screens, not looking at his notes. He looked at the room, at ministers with faces like polished doors, at donors who tasted blood, at staff who looked at their shoes, at Noor and Zara, shadowed beside her, hand firm at the girl's wrist. He did not clear his throat. His voice, when it came, was the one he used to speak to construction crews in storms. No velvet, only steel. There was an image on this screen you were not meant to see, he said. Not like that. Not as a rumor fed to your curiosity. A small silence shaped itself. The truth is simpler, he said, and harder. Noor Rahim is my daughter. A ripple, a sound that was not one sound, moved through the hall. Someone laughed once, a single bark of disbelief. Chairs shifted. The quartet looked down. Arman let the words stand. He did not cushion them. The room needed the hit. I kept a secret because I was a coward, he said, and the word tasted like metal in his mouth. I accepted the terms of other men to keep a company alive, and in doing so, I failed the people I loved. To the city, to my board, to the men and women who work on our sites, to my family I apologize. The investors began to type. Texts jumped like sparks. A minister leaned to another and whispered. Noor did not move. Zara's eyes shone in the wings half dark. Not forgiveness, never that so fast, but something that recognized the shape of what risk looks like. Leela, at the tech booth, closed her eyes for the space of one breath, then opened them and started rerouting cameras to cut the crowd shots that could seed a frenzy. Her hands were precise. Her face was white. Arman continued, and the words found their own path, as if they had been waiting in his chest for 10 years. We have all told ourselves that optics are the body of truth. They are not. We owe you better than stories arranged. For photographs, we owe you safety on our sites. We owe you integrity in our contracts. We owe you honesty even when it costs. He looked up to the balcony where the board clustered like startled birds. Salman stared back, still as stone, eyes unblinking. There will be statements after tonight, Arman said, voice steady, from me, from the company. For now, I ask you to return your attention to what mattered 5 minutes ago, a young architect's vision of a safer coast. That is what brought us here. He set the microphone on its cradle. The fact of it, the click, was louder than the sound should have been. For a brief wedge of time, applause rose. Not everyone, not nearly, but enough. Scattered, then gathered, then torn again by boos, by the thrum of incoming alerts, by the calculus of loss and gain performing itself across 1,000 tiny screens. Arman descended the stairs without looking for eyes. He did not look for Leela. He could feel her orbit, the chill of it. He did not look for Salman. He could feel that gravity even more. He went toward the wing, toward Zara and Noor. Zara did not step forward. She stood braced, like a wall built for a storm, allowing Noor to move if Noor chose. And Noor did, half a step, the muscles of her face not quite trusting themselves. Her gaze touched Arman's and then skittered away, as if direct contact would split her skin. He stopped a pace away. I should have said it to you before I said it to them, he said, soft enough for only the three of them. But if I didn't say it now, I never would. Nora's throat trembled. I didn't ask for your apology, she said. I asked for my work to be seen. It was, Arman said, by anyone with eyes. Salman's voice knifed in, low, precise, right at Arman's ear. You fool. He was close enough that Arman felt the warmth of the word. You've handed Dar a feast, and the board a reason to cut your head from the mast. Leela reached them, already shepherding, already calculating triage. We have to control the room. We need a holding line. We need you off the floor for 10 minutes while Arman raised a hand without looking at her. Not to stop her, she could not be stopped, in the middle of a crisis, but to hold space in the noise. He turned to Noor. You were extraordinary. Whatever comes now, that remains. Noor swallowed and nodded once. Not acceptance. Not yet, but a receipt of the sentence. I'll handle press for the next 5 minutes, Leila said, voice clipped, eyes everywhere. Then we regroup. Salman already had his own regroup, and it was faster. He leaned toward Security Chief Farouk, a man with a neck like a piling. His whisper did not disturb the air. Escort Ms. Rahim and the girl to a private room, said, the words a polite lace over something iron. Now, Farouk hesitated. Sir, optics now, Salman repeated, and the 9-letter word landed like a gavel. 2 security staff appeared at their elbows, as if grown from the glass itself. This way, please, courteous, unyielding. Zara's chin lifted. On what grounds? Press containment, the nearer one said, eyes flat, for their safety. Noor looked past them to the hall, shaking itself into factions, to the phones rising above heads like periscopes, to the microphones being thrust toward the stage. She looked back to Zara. It's okay, she said, though her voice made the phrase a question. We'll talk. Arman stepped with them. I'm coming. Of course, sir, the security man said. His tone suggested nothing was out of order. He led them down a side passage, away from the glare, the noise, the gold. The corridor swallowed sound. The conference room door was heavy, sound. As it closed, the gala's music thinned to a ghost. Locks clicked. 1, 2, 3, phones. The second guard said, "Palm open, all of them." Zara didn't move. The man's smile was gentle. Company policy during a security incident. Noor looked at the hand, then at the man, then at her mother. Zara, without breaking eye contact, reached into her clutch and placed a phone in the guard's palm. He waited. She gave the second one, and the room, now smaller, now airtight, received them like a vault. The doors sealed sighed when they set. The city's music, the horns, the ocean's whisper, the distant choir of 1,000 phones cut away as if a blade had fallen. The conference room was white and clean, a box with a table, 6 chairs, a small carafe of water, and no windows. Carpet that erased footsteps. Air that smelled faintly of citrus and printer ink. Zara has always distrusted rooms that made sound vanish. They were made for decisions that did not wish to be heard. Noor sat straight, palms flat on her knees, as if holding herself to the chair with will alone. Arman stood until the room tried to make that look like aggression, then sat opposite Zara, hands on the table, knuckles white. Leela arrived a moment later, a breathless grace, headset removed, the curve of her jaw taut. A folder lay in front of every chair, blank except for the company crest. The door opened again and Salman entered with legal counsel Parvez in a neat grey suit carrying a leather binder, followed by security chief Farouk, who placed a sleek tray on the table for phones, screen side down, like cooled coins. "Thank you for your cooperation," Salman said, voice smooth as poured syrup. "We've had an unfortunate disruption. We will manage it." He offered Zara a smile as thin as paper. "For your safety, we're keeping this private for a moment." "For our safety," Zara repeated, tasting the words. "Or your boards." "Both, ideally," Salman said. He nodded at Parvez. "Let's proceed." Parvez cleared his throat and slid a stack of documents to the center. "We have narrow NDAs to cover this interim period, to ensure no misstatements escalate a crisis, and a mutual non-disparagement clause too." "No," Noor said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a door closing. Parvez blinked. Salman's smile didn't move. Leela spoke before either man could. "Let's slow down. There's a right sequence. We need to assess what went wrong with the screens. Get a statement drafted. Line up friendly outlets. I'll take the fall for the glitch." Layla added, eyes glancing but not landing on Salman. "Say I pushed the wrong deck feed during a rapid switch. It buys us 48 hours. Zara understood the offer for what it was, a human shield laid gently across a landmine. Salman waved a small dismissal. "We won't be feeding wolves, we'll starve them. Our position is simple. The screen was doctored by a hostile actor. We will deny until we are in possession of facts favorable to us." "Facts favorable to us," Zara repeated. An elegant phrase for a lie. Parvez's binder made a small leather sound as he opened it. "Ms. Rahim, Ms. Noor, there is also a morality clause in the scholarship. Any misrepresentation of identity can trigger." Zara slid a hand into her bag and let paper whisper. Parvez's words paused of their own accord. "Before you brand a teenager a misrepresentation," Zara said, laying a slim folder on the table, "let's make sure everyone is working with the same facts." She opened it with calm hands, though her pulse ticked in her throat. "Old emails," she said, tapping the first printouts. "From a junior site engineer to your safety office, warning about a scaffold load test ignored on the Seaview Tower. Project, dated 3 days before the collapse." Her finger moved to the next. "Draft site audit, marked for internal review, never filed." And here she held up the third, the missing safety report, the one that went from urgent to not located in a single meeting. Parvez inhaled, the first sound that wasn't smooth in the room. Leela pressed her lips together. Relief and fear warred in her eyes, relief that truth existed, fear of its blast radius. Arman didn't move. Only his eyes closed. Salman finally looked alive. He reached for the reports, but Zara drew them back half an inch and turned to Noor. "Your terms," she said, voice gentle now, as if speaking to a client rather than a daughter. "You lead." Noor looked at the papers, then at Salman, at Layla, then finally at Arman, who gave the smallest nod, as if to say, "I'm here." Noor lifted her chin. "3 things," she said. "Calm now. the way she was when walking a frightened homeowner through flood maps. 1. Full-scale funding for the coastal project. I presented no delays, no rebranding it as luxury, a public timeline. 2. Official acknowledgement of my scholarship under my name Noor Rahim by the foundation and the company, posted tonight. 3. A workers' safety overhaul, independent audits, public reports, and a memorial in the name of the man who died. Parvez began. That's reasonable, Arman said, voice low, cutting cleanly across the lawyers. He turned his palms up on the table, as if opening them. We do this. Leela looked at Arman, something raw flashing through her composure. To Noor, she said, if we rush the acknowledgement, we risk. Risk has been living in my house for 10 years. Noor said, it has eaten at our table. I'm not afraid to introduce it to yours. Salman's patience shifted into a new gear, the one where he cornered. Let me translate what you are demanding, he said pleasantly. You want us to light our own IPO on fire, crown you in the smoke, and pray investors applaud the spectacle. And in return, what? Your silence? Your gratitude? Not silence, Zara said, sliding the emails forward now, measured, unblinking. Accountability, yours, mine, his. She didn't touch Arman. She did not need to. We both know how. The scaffold collapsed into a story instead of an investigation. These papers make it a story again, but this time one the city can read. Salman did not reach for the pages. He reached for control. Let's speak of jobs, he said mildly. Thousands. If the IPO breaks under your accountability, those families lose salaries. If the waterfront project goes to Dar, the city loses a generational opportunity. Are you willing to wear that weight on your elegant shoulders? Zara turned the question like a coin in the light. I have worn weight, she said. It fits. Leela broke the standoff with something human. Let me propose a phased disclosure, she said, her voice quieter, more hers. Statement tonight, acknowledging Noor's scholarship under her name. We blame a technical malfunction for the screen. Tomorrow, announce the safety overhaul. Make it our initiative, not a punishment. Then we schedule a joint interview on Noor after markets close. We will still bleed, but we won't hemorrhage. Salman's eyes flicked. He heard the logic. He also smelled surrender inside it. Arman looked at Noor. Your name goes up tonight, he said. I'll stand in the lobby and read it myself if I have to. And the funding, Noor said. The memorial, yes, he said. Salman laughed once. The sound of a man admiring an opponent's audacity. Romantic, he murmured. Suicidal. Zara's wristwatch, the repaired one Noor had returned to her this morning, ticked softly, a sound nearly no one heard but her. A rhythm for courage. Parvez slid a new document across almost reflexively. The habit of a man trained to make any shape into a contract. If we're constructing terms, the lights went out. Not a flicker, a cut. The room folded into black. Air changed shape. Someone's chair rasped. A soft curse. The door's seals whispered, then clanged as an internal lock. Reset. A heartbeat of nothing. Emergency strips bloomed dim along the baseboards, painting ankles in thin silver. On the table, the papers were ghosts. Everyone, stay where you are, Farouk said, voice flat, professional. He moved toward the door, testing the panel. Backup power is engaged on floor systems, not room circuits. We're locked in on a security failsafe. 2 minutes. Zara's fingers landed on the documents instinctively. She gathered them to her, then paused. They were not where her hands expected them to be. Her palms met air. Noora, she said softly. I've got you, Noora answered, and Zara felt her daughter's hand touch her forearm in the dark. The reassurance was a wire pulled tight across a chasm. The emergency strips brightened a fraction. On the table, the folders were gone. Parvez patted the surface, shock finally cracking his voice. They were. I had. Salman did not speak. He was listening. 2 footsteps. 2 the whir of a vent. 2 the sound of a plan moving in shadow. A muffled chime sounded from the corridor, a tone Zara had learned to fear in the last hour. The atrium's alert. Farouk lifted his wrist unit close to his ear. Say again, he murmured. A pause. How many? Another pause. Inside the main hall, he looked up, composure ruffled now. Press has breached the atrium, he said. Multiple outlets unscreened. Someone opened the side entrances. Leela's mouth parted. If they're inside the lobby, they'll be at this door in 60 seconds. Salman's smile returned, slow and satisfied, as if the room had finally arrived where he had been waiting to greet it. Zara looked at Noor, her daughter's face, pale in the emergency washhand, then at Arman, whose fists had opened without his permission. Between the thin silver lines of light and the dark, the city pressed its ear to their wall. The lock on the conference room clicked open, and the hallway beyond wasn't quiet anymore. It was a flood. Camera flashes popped like small explosions. Voices rose, pitched high with excitement and hunger. Somewhere beyond the glass wall of the atrium, the city had heard the story and come running. Hashtags pulsed on live screens, tweets spinning into thousands of likes before they even finished loading. Influencers in glitter gowns wept into their phones, promising to stand with Noor without actually knowing what they were standing for. A fitness vlogger in sequins narrated her shock to 200,000 viewers, and everywhere, strangers' voices twisted her name into speculation, half-truth, and tabloid echo. The office security moved to shield her, but Rayan Malik slid through the chaos with the precision of a man who had been working in doorways his whole life. His camera hung from a strap, his phone in his hand. He caught her eye. "Noor," he said, low enough for only her to hear. "Do you want your story now, on your terms?" Her pulse stumbled. The air smelled of perfume and overheated lights. Behind her, Zara's hand hovered near her elbow, protective, waiting. "Yes," Noor said. The balconian guided her through a side hall and up a short flight of stairs. They emerged onto a narrow balcony high over the city. Below, the street glittered with brake lights, a swarm of reporters, curious pedestrians, and the long lenses of cameras hunting for angles. The wind cut cleaner here. The noise from the gala dulled into a hum. "Stand there," Rayan said, adjusting his lens. "Straight on. Don't name names. Talk about what you stand for, not who you stand against." She nodded once, drew in a breath, and stepped forward until the city's light painted her in silver and gold. "My name is Noor Rahim," she began, voice steady. "I am an architect in training. I work to design spaces that protect, rather than exploit, the people who live in them." Wind lifted her hair, and she let it. "I was given a scholarship tonight for my coastal housing project. It's work I believe in, not because it's profitable, but because it saves lives. This city, our country, has coastlines that are home to thousands of families. They deserve safety, dignity, and a future." She felt Rayan's silent encouragement, but more than that, she felt her mother's presence just behind her. "Everything I am comes from my mother's strength," she said. "Her choices, her courage, her refusal to let the tides decide who gets to survive. That is my legacy. That is my foundation." She let the silence after that line hang just long enough to turn into weight. "I will keep working," Noor said, voice tightening. "Whatever anyone says, whatever anyone tries to take, this is my work, and I will build it." Rayan lowered his camera slowly, nodding. "That's the headline." Inside the boardroom, while Noor spoke above the city, the boardroom 3 floors down was a furnace. Salman stood at the head of the table, voice smooth, words like cooled bullets. "We have a crisis created not by an accident, but by recklessness. Our CEO has admitted, on a public stage, to a 10-year concealment that calls into question his integrity and the stability of this company. Shareholders will ask why we were not informed sooner. Competitors are already positioning themselves to take our waterfront project." He glanced down at a prepared statement. "I am calling a vote to remove Arman Rahim as CEO, pending an internal investigation." The faces around the table were pale with calculation. Some feared the damage. Others smelled opportunity. Leela's realization just outside the boardroom. Leela Mir paced. She had come here to steady the optics, but now she was watching the heart of the company eat itself alive. A tech assistant stepped up, whispering, "The feed glitch. It wasn't an accident. It came from inside." "Sir, ma'am?" Who Leila asked sharply. The answer came with the shape of the routing, internal, cleared at the highest level, masked with a familiar signature. Salman's dot. It fell into place. He'd planted the leak, not to destroy Arman entirely, but to force a denial that would erase Noor quietly and cement the board's hold. Arman's public acknowledgement had wrecked that plan, so now Salman was skipping to the next best thing. Remove the obstacle. Leela's stomach turned, but her hands were steady as she reached into her clutch for her phone. She slipped into a shadowed corner, hit record, and walked back into the boardroom. "The confrontation, you're very confident this was reckless disclosure." "Salman," she said, voice carrying, Salman's head lifted. Layla, this is a board matter, confident enough to sabotage the screen to force it. She said, crisp, because I have your routing signature on the feed error. Want me to play it? Murmurs hit the walls. The chairman looked at Salman, his fingers drummed the table. Salman didn't flinch, but the stillness around him thickened. Begum Sadaf arrives before he could answer. The boardroom door opened without a knock. Begum Sadaf Rahim stepped in, leaning on a silver-headed cane. Her sari was deep maroon, her pearls heavy, her gaze sharper than any man at the table. She was old money made into steel, the kind that remembered the city before the skyscrapers. Gentlemen, she said, her voice low but cutting through every murmur. Ladies, I am here because my family name is on this building, on the harbor, on the lives of thousands. Her eyes moved to Salman like a predator's. And I will say this clearly, Noor Rahim is my granddaughter. She will be recognized as such, publicly, if that troubles your markets. Perhaps your investments were never as strong as you told yourselves. No one spoke. Even Salman's composure faltered at the corners. The vote but tradition and power had different measures here. Recognition in blood was one thing. Control of billions was another. The chairman cleared his throat. The motion to remove Mr. Arman Rahim as CEO stands. All in favor. Hands rose. Too many. Leela stayed still. Sadaf did not raise hers, but she was not on the board. All opposed. Fewer hands. Not enough. The vote was tallied in seconds. Motion carries. Effective immediately. Mr. Rahim is relieved of his position pending investigation. It was clean, brutal, corporate in the way wars were corporate now, fought in rooms, sealed with paper. The market reaction. A junior member slipped in with a tablet. Futures are reacting, he said, voice thin. We're down 12% already. The numbers blinked red, 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 across the screen. Layla looked at Arman, who had not moved since the vote. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on some far horizon only he could see. Sadaf put a hand on his shoulder, brief, strong, before turning away to make calls that would ripple through the city by morning. Outside, Noor was still on the balcony, the wind threading through her hair, unaware that the company whose name she bore had just cut her father from its helm. The city moved on the surface, but underneath it was still chewing on the gala. For weeks, every newspaper, every newsfeed, every comment thread fed on the Rahim scandal. Zara's old student. Photos surfaced with headlines that twisted her into caricatures. Ambitious and CEO's secret mistake. The woman who cost the company billions. Nora's face in her gala dress at her presentation on that balcony was cropped, memmed, and argued over by strangers who hadn't listened to a word she'd said about mangroves. And online, the trolls came. Anonymous accounts called her a fraud, a gold digger's daughter, a liar with a manufactured project. Sponsors that had been eager to link their names to Noor's design quietly withdrew. A high-profile construction supplier paused funding. The Rahim Foundation board announced her scholarship was temporarily suspended, pending verification of eligibility. The stock didn't stop bleeding until the company's market cap was down a projected $1 billion. The quiet apartment Arman had gone from the top floor of Rahim Holdings to a bare rented apartment in Clifton with a single couch, a coffee table, and the sound of his own breathing. No skyline views, no personal assistant in the next room. Just him and the weight of a decade's compromises. At first, the quiet felt like absence. Then it began to feel like space, dangerous, in its way, because in space you heard things you'd been ignoring. In the mornings, he made coffee with a tin mocha pot, the kind you set directly on the flame. He kept the cracked watch on the counter. Sometimes he turned it over in his hand before leaving. Work without a name through an old contact in city planning. Arman found Imran Sheikh, the head of a small, underfunded site safety non-profit. That same Imran whose brother had died the night Zara had walked out. Arman didn't introduce himself with his full name. He didn't ask for a title or a press release. He just said, I can help. I know the inspections they fake. I know where they hide the cost-cutting in the blueprints. Imran had looked at him for a long moment, then said, you can carry boxes, and you can take statements without interrupting. So, Arman carried boxes, heavy paper archives of old safety audits, and drove Imran to community meetings. He sat through interviews with laborers whose calloused hands told stories, more plainly than their words. For the first time in years, nobody looked at him as a man who could sign a contract that moved millions. They looked at him as someone who was there to listen. The offer to disappear one night, Zara called. The sound of her voice, even wary, made the room feel different. "They've sent me an offer," she said. "From the board, from intermediaries," she replied. "They say if I leave the city again permanently, they'll reinstate Noor's scholarship, quietly, retroactive, no questions." And he asked, though he knew, and I said no. He closed his eyes. "They'll make it harder. For her, they already are," she said. "At least this way, it's on my terms." The legal move Mira filed an injunction 2 days later. The petition named the foundation's suspension of Noor's scholarship as an act of retaliatory deprivation, citing breach of contract and discrimination. It bought Noor breathing room. The headlines shifted, slightly, in her direction. The break in the wall. Then came the leak. A 3-minute audio file appeared on 2 independent journalists' feeds. Leela's voice, calm but edged, asking pointed questions. Salman's voice, answering. On the tape, he admitted to orchestrating the gala screen reveal, to force a clean denial, and referred to the Seaview Tower safety report as better buried than broadcast. Hours later, Rayan Malik published a 12,000-word expose on the scaffolding collapse, the concealed safety warnings, and the web of payouts that had erased the incident from public record. The story carried scanned documents, some from Dr. Mira, some clearly from Arman's own files. The effect was slow but certain. Opinion pieces began to call Noor's suspension untenable, her coastal project an urgent necessity, and the Rahim board's actions a study in corporate self-preservation at the expense of the public good. A pivot in the air. By the end of the month, workers marched outside Rahim Holdings' glass entrance with signs demanding safety reforms. Some carried mangrove branches, painted silver, as a nod to Noor's project. A popular hashtag paired her name with the word foundations. In the quiet apartment, Arman watched the footage on a small TV. It felt strange, seeing Noor's vision growing even as the company tried to wall her out. Strange too, feeling proud without wanting to control it. The call from the coalition was almost midnight when the phone rang, not the cell, but the old landline in the kitchen. "This is Hazen Rafiq," the voice said. "We've met at shareholder summits." Arman remembered him, an older man with eyes like black glass, known for rallying coalitions when the board became too predictable. "We've reviewed recent events," Hazen said. "Some of us believe the company needs a course correction, leadership with credibility, especially after Salman's exposure. We can make a case for your reinstatement." Arman leaned against the counter. "You're asking me back?" "Yes," Hazen said, "but only if you cut all visible ties with Zara and Noor until the dust settles. We cannot rebuild the company while half the market thinks you're running it as a family redemption drama." Silence stretched. The mocha pot gleamed dully on the stove. The cracked watch ticked faintly in his palm. "Do you understand the terms?" Hazen asked. Arman did. All too well. When the story broke, Zara expected Arman to retreat behind lawyers and neutral statements, the way men in his position always did. Instead, he called a press conference, not in a hotel ballroom or corporate lobby, but on a cracked concrete pier that still smelled of low tide. He stood in shirt sleeves, no podium, no board seal behind him. "I will not accept the board's terms," he said into the wind. "I will not erase my family to save my title. I will not return to Rahim Holdings under conditions that require lies." He paused, letting the microphones breathe. "Instead, I'm announcing the creation of the Rahim Coastal Resilience Foundation, an independent venture led by myself and architect Noor Rahim." The reporters tried to wedge questions into the salt air, but his final line landed like a nail in wet wood. "We will build without permission from those who believe safety is optional." Reluctant agreement. 2 days later, Arman came to Zara's apartment. He didn't come to talk about the past, not in the personal sense. His words were strictly about structure, timelines, feasibility. "It has to be separate from Rahim Holdings," he said. "Clean funding lines, no contamination from the board. But I can bring in early investors, people who want to be on the right side of the story." Zara listened, arms folded. "I will work with you for Noor's sake," she said. "At last, not for reconciliation, not for anything beyond this project." His nod was brief. Understood. It was an agreement signed in the absence of sentiment, but also, Zara noticed, in the absence of hostility. Assembling the team within a week, They had a war table in a borrowed co-working space. Dr. Mira, sharp-eyed and relentless with paperwork, overseeing contracts and compliance. Imran Sheikh, building safety into the bones of the plan and acting as liaison to workers' unions. Kabir, suddenly elevated from best friend with a camera to social strategy lead, mapping out how to keep the public narrative on Noor's terms. Professor Anna D'Souza, a respected urban resilience expert, charting the environmental data with cool precision. Noor sat at the center of the table, unrolling updated drafts of her coastal plan, rezoned waterfront parcels, worker-lead safety audits, mangrove corridors layered between mixed-income housing complexes. This isn't charity, Noor told the group. It's a template for every coastal city in the region. We make it work here, it becomes policy elsewhere. Zara watched her daughter hold the room, and for the first time in weeks, her chest eased. Pitching the city, they brought the plan to City Hall, a long afternoon under the gaze of officials who smelled opportunity as well as risk. Noor handled the environmental arguments. Annika fielded zoning objections. Imran pressed the urgency of worker safety. Arman, to Zara's surprise, spoke least. When he did, it was to back Noor's figures with a simple, "And I've seen the cost of not doing this." It carried weight, not as a CEO's authority, but as a man's admission. The next morning, the largest daily ran an editorial calling it the redemption plan. Funding pledges began to arrive, small at first, then a few larger commitments from civic-minded investors. An unexpected patron, the most surprising, came in person. One evening, Begum Sadaf Rahim arrived at the co-working space with a small velvet case. She set it on the table in front of Noor. Inside lay a pomegranate-shaped gold ring, deep garnet at its center. "This belonged to my mother," Sadaf said. "I am selling it, along with other pieces, to seed your project's initial budget. Build what we did not." Noor's eyes widened. I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Sadaf replied. "Work." Zara felt a strange twist in her chest. Pride, yes, but also something like relief that Noor would have allies in places Zara could never have reached. Trust by inches. In the weeks that followed, Zara and Arman learned to stand at the same table. Without tensing, she began to trust that his silences were not always avoidance. Sometimes they were him holding space for someone else's expertise. He began to respect that her corrections were not sabotage but calibration. When disagreements came, and they did, they were fought on the terrain of data, budgets, and timetables, not on the wreckage of their past. It wasn't friendship, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was work, and the work was clean. The warning late one evening, as Zara was packing up draft contracts, Kabir came in from the street, rain in his hair, holding his phone out. "You need to see this," he said. On the screen, a live weather update showed a red spiral tightening in the Arabian Sea. Cyclone warning issued scrolled across the bottom in urgent text. The projected path curved directly toward the old coastal slum Noor had used as her pilot model. Landfall in 48 hours. Kabir read. Zara's pulse spiked. She looked toward Noor, who was bent over her desk, oblivious to the storm building on two fronts. The sirens started just after dawn, a rising mechanical wail that bent through the city's glass and stone like a warning from the sea itself. By mid-morning, the streets ran with the first brown currents. The rain was metallic, driven sideways, tasting of rust and salt. Buses chugged past, their wheels churning water into fans that slapped against storefronts. The air smelled of oil and mangrove roots, the real ones Noor had planted months ago, and the memory of those still in blueprint form. Her phone lit with the alert. Cyclone making landfall in 6 hours. Target zone. The old coastal slum her pilot design had been modeled on. The team in motion. They had no headquarters now. No boardroom, just the network they had built. Arman commandeered to earth movers from a stalled city project, driving them himself down the half-flooded roads toward the waterfront. Zara was already there with Imran Sheikh, guiding families toward the elevated shelters Noor had designed into the plan's later phases. Children clung to plastic-wrapped bundles. Elders leaned on each other as they crossed makeshift gangways. In the co-working space, Leela had turned her media console into a live hub, pushing out evacuation routes, verified safety points, and storm updates across every channel she could reach. Kabir wove between downed lines and stalled taxis, filming, not for spectacle but for clarity. "This street is closed. Go here instead." His live stream became the one the city trusted. And somewhere above it all, Rayan documented without commentary, his lens fixed on hands passing sandbags, on rope lines holding against the water's pull, on the mangroves bending but holding, testing the mangroves. By the time Noor reached the waterfront, the storm had swallowed the horizon. Her pilot mangrove corridor was already half submerged, their roots weaving through the surge like black lace. The elevated market platforms were holding, water rushing under and out again instead of hammering the walls. For a moment, she let herself register it, the proof that her plan worked. Then she saw the breach. A retaining wall at the southern edge had begun to buckle. Water punched through in short, vicious bursts, tearing at the base. If it gave way fully, the rush would take the low cluster of homes behind it. The runner grabbed the safety harnesses from the supply stack and sprinted. Rain blinded her, turned the concrete slick under her boots. She shouted for 3 volunteers, but the wind shredded the words. Arman appeared out of the storm's blur, already pulling on a harness. "You're not going alone." She tossed him the second set without slowing. "We need anchors on the east side, sandbags, ropes from the rigging stack." Now, they waded into the breach, water dragging at their legs. The wall groaned under the pressure, a deep, resonant sound that made her think of bones under strain. On her wrist, the stopped watch, the one she had repaired and returned to Arman before the cyclone warning, ticked steadily under the water and rain, each beat absurdly calm against the chaos. Holding the line, they worked wordlessly, passing sandbags in a human chain, dropping them into the gaps, driving rebar through the loops to hold them against the current. The volunteers' faces were streaked with rain and salt. The mangroves swayed and clawed at the surge, taking the first bite out of each wave before it hit the wall. Noor slipped once, her knees slamming into stone. Arman's hand caught her harness strap, hauling her upright before the water could take her balance completely. "You good?" he shouted over the wind. Not stopping, she shouted back, and kept moving. It was an hour of water, sand, and the ache in her shoulders, before the wall stopped groaning and began to hold. The current found easier paths elsewhere. The pressure dropped. By dawn when the light came, it was a weak grey, diffused through the storm's retreat. The air still smelled of salt and diesel, but the neighborhood was standing. The mangroves dripped and shivered but remained rooted. The market platforms were slick but intact. People emerged from the shelters wet, shaken, but alive. Noor felt the knot in her chest loosen, just enough to let air in. The flip in the story by noon. Photos of the intact neighborhood were everywhere. A before and after composite. Before, the aerial map of where the cyclone had been forecast to cut. After, the image of homes, still upright behind the mangroves, trended across the city. Donations poured into the foundation's site. Anonymous transfers, corporate pledges, handwritten envelopes arriving at the co-working space with cash wrapped in plastic. The Rahim Holdings board, cornered by public fury and embarrassed by the comparison, announced Salman Qureshi's resignation to pursue other opportunities. In an interview later that week, Leela confirmed she had ended her engagement amicably, though her eyes told a different, freer story. The sapling 2 days after the storm, when the water had drained back to the sea and the air carried the green scent of wet earth, Noor walked to the edge of the waterfront with a small burlap-wrapped bundle in her hands. Arman and Zara stood a few paces away, watching but not intruding. She knelt and planted the pomegranate sapling beside the first line of mangroves, its roots tucked into the soil that had held through the storm. She stood, brushed the dirt from her hands, and turned to face them both. "We have to talk," she said, "about us." The wind shifted, carrying the salt and the faint, bruised sweetness of pomegranate blossom. They didn't move closer, but they didn't step back either. Their faces were open, afraid, and for the first time in years, ready.